Hi, my name is Scott, the Miniature Maniac, and today we're going to sculpt a miniature from scratch. What up, mini family? I've never sculpted something before, let alone something miniatures. And the human form is fairly complex as far as its ratios go. So if I sculpted something humanoid, it would look like total butt cheeks. So I have a plan. Okay, I can't sculpt the human form. A little too complicated, as previously mentioned, and I've been into Doom lately, so put those two together, and what am I gonna sculpt? A cacodemon. Essentially, a spherically shaped, fleshy ball of demony goodness with some dangly bits, some horns, some teeth, a singular eye, some harder-like armor up top, and of course, a demon nutsack. First things first, however, before we start sculpting any dangly bits or demon nutsacks, let's build an armature for our miniature to sculpt on top of. I grabbed some cork, brass, and milliput. I stuck 2 pieces of brass in the cork and put a ball of milliput on top of it as my form to sculpt on top of. I was concerned that with just 1 piece of brass, the ball would spin too much in the cork, so I added another. I also stuck in some bendy paper clips to act as armatures for the future dangly bits that are hanging off of the cacodemon. I then started to sculpt the larger cheek areas of the cacodemon, and pretty much immediately I could tell that my original ball was significantly too small. There's no sense in making this thing smaller than the typical 32mm scale. If you compare this to the Doomslayer himself, a cacodemon is the same size as him, if not a little bit larger. But before we go for round 2 and make a bigger ball, let's do some research. I definitely like to jump into things with zero plan and know-how and totally fail. It's like my favorite thing to do. So after a brief stint with failure, I decided to check out some YouTube videos about sculpting miniatures. I'm not trying to be the mini version of Michelangelo, I just want to dip my toes, so I was looking for tricks and tips to sculpting, not foundational knowledge. I'll link the channels that I found in the description below so you can check them out. After some research, I decided I wanted to give this a shot again, primarily using green stuff. A 2-part epoxy putty that is a very popular sculpting material for the miniature hobby, but I had a minor hang-up. I want to try sculpting with green stuff, but I don't have any green stuff. Now luckily, there's a store like right down the street called the Source Comic and Games that's wholly overexposure. Right, what was I saying? There's a store down the street called the Source Comic and Games that does pickup right now during the coronavirus. I'm gonna go grab some, and then we'll start sculpting some details on our cacodemon. Taco Demon! With the green stuff in hand and a lesson learned, I got onto my second attempt. I used tin foil to bulk out the initial sphere so I wasn't wasting so much putty, and I covered it in milliput and did all the same things as the first attempt. To speed up the process so I can start sculpting on this sooner rather than later, I popped this in the oven at 175 Fahrenheit or 75 degrees Celsius for 15 minutes and let it cool off for another 5. I actually did this probably 10 times at various incremental stages during the sculpting so I could keep working on it in a given day. This baking isn't required like for other sculpting materials like Fimo. Green stuff will cure over time, but I'm impatient so I gave it a kick. When that was ready, I began sculpting with a mixture of epoxy sculpt and green stuff under the advice of some of the videos that I had watched earlier. I started with the top ridge down the middle of the cacodemon. Once the size was right and I was sure it was stuck down, which I accomplished by crimping the edges to the ball, I smoothed it out with a neutral, scentless hand lotion and this spoon-like metal sculpting tool. I moved on to the singular eye, which can be somewhat of a daunting task, but with a clever tip from modern synthesist, I punched out the eye with the end of a pen tip, which got me a nearly perfect circle immediately. From there, I sculpted a typical eye shape, with the plan of adding the eyelids on later. I started to carve in the ridges of the top spine at this point, referencing the concept art to see which direction they were going in, and smoothing out the ridges with the same metal sculpting tool as before, and some very helpful silicone color shapers. In fact, these two tools are what I used exclusively for the rest of the miniature.
The tools and materials I used in this video will be linked below in case you wanted to pick them up for yourself. Once that part was done and was baked, I moved on to sculpting the characteristic eyelids, which make the Cacodemon look very grumpy. While I do that, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Are you into games like Dota 2, League of Legends, Smite, or Heroes of Newerth? What's Heroes of Newerth? Never mind, that game is dead. Skytear is a MOBA-inspired board game developed by PvP geeks that comes with a variety of factions and sculpts. Look at these tiny little minions. They are so damn cute. Similar to Malifaux, the game features no dice and instead generates actions via a deck of cards in the game. Unlike Malifaux, however, the minis come pre-assembled and are not a total pain to put together. Each game plays in less than an hour. The base game costs $70 and PvP Geeks sells a variety of expansions for $35 each to add more variety to your gameplay experience. For viewers of this channel, when you check out with the coupon code Miniac, you get one entire expansion for free. That's 33 individual models and 15 unique sculpts. They offer free shipping on their website when you spend more than $99 to anywhere in the continental US. You can find all the information you need to check out this game linked in the description below. Thank you for sponsoring this episode, PvP Geeks. Now back to the video. At this point, I felt a lesson creeping up.
One thing that I'm learning from sculpting from a concept art like this is that there are tons of overlapping details, and it would have been a good idea to sit down with the concept art, figure out what to sculpt first, and then second, and then third, so I can get the correct order, so all of my overlapping details are correct. I don't have to do any weird sculpting to try to make things look correct.
With the eye pretty much finished up despite that minor mistake, I moved on to the mouth, and this is where I learned that green stuff can be pushed and prodded in a lot of different ways, and all of these different interactions create unique and interesting results. As I pushed up from the underside of the lip, it created a great gum-line cavity for a future tooth to go in. I pretty much repeated the operation from the bottom lip and then got onto sculpting the teeth. I started to realize that less was more. A very small amount of green stuff made a fairly large tooth. This was kind of a tedious process, making sure the green stuff stuck down to the model, but once I got that down, it was pretty easy to make a triangle shape. I started with the bigger teeth as they were easier to get right. After the whole mouth was squared away, I started to work on the sides of the Cacodemon, which are like a harder exoskeleton. It's kind of difficult to sculpt something that is relatively flat, but also make it look like a distinct texture from, say, something more fleshy. But this is what I tried. After a veneer of green stuff was on the demon ball, I began to flatten specific sections with a putty knife or that spoon tool that I'm starting to realize is probably the best thing since sliced bread. I started to get these angular shapes, which looked great. It made it look like a hard exterior. Some other helpful details that could relay the idea of an exoskeleton are scratches and dings, which I added after the putty was hardened by cutting it with an X-Acto knife. Next up, the horns. My first idea was to sculpt the horns on some more paperclip, apart from the actual Cacodemon, and then pin them on, and while that did work, it seemed like a lot of unnecessary work. For the future horns, I simply drilled into the sculpt and added pins, and then sculpted right on top of that. And that seemed more simple. At a certain point, my model started to look like a Hellraiser-inspired Cacodemon, which would actually be pretty cool. I started to sculpt on the top of the wires and kind of ran into a problem.
I'm struggling to get the milliput to stick to my wire armature. Maybe the lesson that I learned here is that before putting it in my model, I should have roughened it up some way so there was better adhesion for the milliput to stick to my paperclip. Also, the paperclip was a little bit too thick in diameter to get the crispness that I want to with my horns. Maybe in the future when I want to do something similar to this, I'll get a thinner diameter armature wire to allow for higher fidelity. Lesson learned.
I bulldozed through that problem and added a variety of horns of different sizes and shapes, mostly because I can't duplicate a shape to save my life, but you and I will pretend that this was intentional. Lastly, I made some fleshy skin texture everywhere where there was an exoskeleton. I sculpted the arms, which look so awful that I don't even want to show you the process, and I clipped off the 2 brass wires. And last but not least, I added the most important detail to my cacodemon, his nutsack. And that was my first ever miniature sculpt complete. Sculpting is scary because being bad at things is scary. Whenever someone asks me to do a video about a subject I'm unfamiliar with, in the back of my head I think, yeah, sure, I'll do it when I figure it out and have something valuable to say. But sometimes a beginner's approach to a subject can be helpful for other beginners. Others can copy what worked for me and learn from where I messed up. As a semi-proficient miniature painter, I sometimes don't know all the questions a beginner may ask, so I don't answer them in every video. But hopefully in this beginner approach to sculpting, I was able to address some of those types of questions. I had a decent amount of fun sculpting this miniature, and I want to encourage you guys to try something similar. Take a subject you like a video game, and find something non-humanoid and give it a shot. If you guys like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are a number of ways that you can do that. Namely, a Patreon campaign with a bunch of fun rewards, like a Discord server where you can access my miniature community and talk about your latest painting projects or your favorite demon appendages. You also get things like videos a week early from me, extra content, and you can also support the channel in other ways, like buying merchandise or miniatures that I produce or hobby equipment that I recommend in the description below. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minutes!